Monastery of Death by Charles Stross. Read by Adam Nicol. Tenzig didn't realize what was going on until he viewed the book in the crypt beneath the library, but when he did, it began to become clearer. It didn't make a nice picture. He was still hunched over the fading screen of the viewer hours later, when the Master of Secret Arts passed by his booth and touched him on the shoulder with the tip of a finger. Tenzig turned in his seat and looked up inquiringly. The Master beckoned, and Tenzig forced himself to his feet. The world seemed to be spinning around his tired head as he followed the Master out of the silence of the scriptorium and into the echoing brightness of the Pentagon. The condition of silence was lifted, but even so, his lips were too dry for speech. "Why?" he croaked. The Master spared him a brief, enigmatic glance before turning back to the path. "White noise," he said, gravel crunching beneath his sandals. The day was dry and mild, the clouds overhead masking the star glare into a lambent glow that washed all traces of shadow from the scene, so they seemed to walk through liquid light. "You will join me in my retreat," the Master said, rubbing his shaven skull with the heel of one hand, as if the enlightenment of ages required the polishing of flesh. "Some things are not fit for conversation in public. Perhaps some novice overhearing these matters might panic. Perhaps the sky might fall." Perhaps, Tenzig thought. Perhaps was the holy word of the Order, an admission of doubt in the face of overwhelming probability. The Master might equally say, well, perhaps not. The facts, as Tenzig saw them, were absolutely terrifying. The Imperium was returning. The Master's retreat was high in the north tower of the monastery, one of the oldest buildings in the complex, and indeed one of the oldest on the planet. Cold, chiselled blocks of stone had been placed atop one another without mortar, their massive weight holding them in place. The clement weather and lack of quakes in the area had allowed them to last for a long time. Generations of monks had lived, toiled, and died beneath the gaze of those high windows. That is not to say that the retreat was austere. His Master had many rooms, floored and walled in polished palm wood that had achieved a dark glossy finish through the centuries of rubbing. The furniture was of greater antiquity than Tenzig's ancestry. And it was into this environment that the Master of the Secret Arts led his postulant and offered him hospitality. "Please be seated," said the Master, as Tenzig slid shut the screen door behind him and stood uncertainly in the portal. A thin smile flitted across the Master's face as he strode over to the window and looked out. With measured movements, his eyes scanned the horizon, and then, as if satisfied, his fingers rested for a moment on a concealed spot on the window frame. Tenzig stared with fascination as his silhouette shifted. Where behind him there had been landscape and sky, now there was a glowing plane of light. "A randomizer," his Master said, still with that faintly knowing smile. "We are safe from eavesdroppers for the time being." He moved to the wooden reading throne beneath the window and sat in it, hands resting on armrests polished black by generations of his predecessors in office. "Now, Tenzig, perhaps you are ready to report to me what you have seen, so that I may convey the joyful tidings to Brother Abbot." Tenzig shifted in his squat. The cushion beneath him felt unnaturally soft after years of meditation on polished wooden floors. "I fear there are scant glad tidings for the Master of Temporal Administration," he said hesitantly. "As you suggested in your wisdom, I consulted the archives for reference to this ancient body of law. The old paper archives, the chronicles of the ancients, not the true library. It would appear that one time the bodies secular were visited on a regular basis by an overlord from beyond the sky, that he claimed high office. He claimed others ranked higher yet than his exalted person. Such taxes as he extracted he took in their name. Insurrectionists were dealt with cruelly, but the last such visit occurred many centuries ago, before the time of the foundation of our order, even before the near stars went out. The texts say little on the matter of the Imperium he claimed to represent, save only what we already know, and that none can stand against such force. He fell silent. The only noise in the retreat was the faint north wind outside the walls. The master of the secret arts, those arts upon which the monks had depended for their defence across the centuries, bowed his head in silent contemplation. Tenzig felt fear. If he had caused even the master of the secret arts to despair. A man who possessed such awesome powers that it was whispered that he could cause a leaf to wither by blowing on it. The implications were barely worth considering. I am a channel, he recited to himself in silence, a stream through which the water of history can flow. I cannot obstruct, I cannot distort, and with the passage of my life I enlarge the channel a little, so that my successors can expand it further. This is with the Catechism of the Order of the Heavenly Virtues, who defended wisdom in a world so plainly lacking in it, and the branch of the order known as the Secret Arts, who defended the defenders of wisdom. Tenzig shivered, feeling the roots of his being bend in an unholy tempest of doubt. For if the Master could not see a solution, what hope was there for such as he? The power from beyond the sky would brook no rivals, and through forces of circumstance, the order might almost be one. The Master's head snapped up, and Tenzig froze before his gaze like a small bird before a snake. Eyes of utter blackness seemed to drill right into his soul. His muscles tensed in reflex, and he found himself unable to move. Never think that we are endangered, postulant Tenzig, said the Master mildly. There are no absolutes, even for gods. I have much thinking to do and little time left. Tell me, he added, his hands fiddling with the bulbous armrests, what do we know of the theosophy of those who come from the stars? Tenzig blinked. They believe in absolutes, he said. Absolute power and absolute evil and absolute ignorance. They are trapped in the cycle of their own eternal turmoil, and they will subject us to it if they can. They accept only mindless ascension to their cant, with which our uncertain dogmas might be— Stop! The Master held up his right hand. Your bias is becoming intrusive. Have you learned nothing? No, Master. Humbled, Tenzig bowed his head. Rueful self-doubt tugged at him. Have I been colouring them with my own demons? He wondered. The Imperials are undoubtedly inimical to the Order, pronounced the Master, but to act in haste is worse than not to act at all. He stood. There will be a concilium of the Masters, where Brother Abbot will make his determination, and then we shall see how to deal with the outsiders. He smiled. Perhaps even with the Imperium. There will be a way. Judith glanced from the swirl of stars to the planet through the observation deck window. Indescribable thoughts circulating in her head. A billiard ball of white mist, it was totally featureless from orbit. It reminded her of her homeworld, except that Neos 4 had been grey rather than creamy white, and everybody on it had died shortly after her departure. Her abduction. Recruitment, rather. She grimaced at the recollection and looked back at the global cluster, shifting her grip on the free-fall grab rail. The star swarm was magnificent, a diadem of stars that gleamed across half the galaxy, and drowned the Milky Way with its brilliance. It was the magnificence of a jewelled catacomb. During the Age of Strife, entire suns had disappeared into warp space, frozen husks of 1,000 civilizations drifted between the stars. How had this world escaped was beyond understanding, but now that it had been rediscovered, it would be the job of this mission to purge it of deviants and mutants, and install puppet rulers to support the imperial demands. "Another dirtball, eh?" said Joachim Harriman, grinning humorously at her. He stood behind her, a slim figure clothed entirely in form-fitting blackness, the lightweight armour of a member of the Adeptus, the Order of Judges. "Just another fly-blown wasteland full of nomads, I wouldn't wonder." "Possibly not," she murmured. "When's the report for the preliminary probe due in?" "Shortly." Joachim fell silent, also contemplating the world, but also from his own perspective of elevated disdain. Joachim considered any world not of the Imperium to be barbaric, its inhabitants barely more than animals. It was a failing, Judith thought. Even barbarians could display sophistication and indirection, which is why they were here. An assassin and a martial priest of the Adeptus Arbites sent to support the Inquisitor in his reassertion of power over the lost worlds of this cluster, of which Haito was the seventh in priority. She pursed her lips as she glanced at him. "Why did they have to saddle me with such an intolerant fanatic like this?" she thought. "Surely nobody could be this crude. Perhaps it's an attempt to discredit me." A tone rang out from the annunciator. Joachim answered it. "Yeah," he said impatiently. "This is the Holy Office. We have cleared the preliminary probe. Reports are coming in of an indigenous civilization, some tech law, a native government. Would you care to examine them?" Joachim snorted, but Judith spoke over his shoulder. "I'll be up shortly." "Tell me if they can talk," he called out after her as she went up the tube to the body of the ship. "Tell me if they look human." She shook her head as she climbed the decks towards the holy mission. A government to deal with delicately. She was going to have to do it saddled with a blunt instrument like Joachim. What kind of bloody mess was he going to make of this one? And then a thought occurred to her. Perhaps it could be turned to her advantage. On leaving the presence of the master, Tenzig returned to his cell. He changed his loose, dark habit for the white woolen surplice of a postulant, and then composed himself for meditation. He was not surprised when, presently, a visitor knocked on his door. Moving to open it, he was confronted by a young novice. "The abbot would like to see you," he stammered at Tenzig, eyes wide at the prospect of attracting such attention. "I am to take you." "Then lead." Deep in thought, Tenzig followed the boy through the passages of the monastery, out into the open pentagon at the heart of it, and across to the White Tower, where Brother Abbot and his staff controlled the day-to-day destiny of the Order. The burden of foreknowledge was heavy on Tenzig, as the novice brought him to a halt outside the wide, thick doors of the tower. The boy stopped and looked up. "I am not allowed to come any further," he said. "You are to proceed from here alone." Tenzig paused, nonplussed. Presently he grinned. Not waiting to see if the boy would go, he turned to the door and rapped hard on the rough surface with his right hand. Invisible eyes stared at him, and presently the door opened. "Postulant Tenzig," said the sallow-faced monk behind it. "You are bidden enter. May your stay bring honor to the Order." "And may its days be long," Tenzig replied with an inclination of his head. The doorkeeper stepped back, admitting him and shutting the portal. Tenzig looked around, ignoring the strangely fashioned weapon that the monk held loosely. Bare polished stone and solid black iron, an architecture of war. But of course, the knowledge of the Order of the Heavenly Virtues was its treasure, and during times of trouble, the Order's reputation was not always an adequate defense. "You are to come this way," said the gatekeeper, beckoning Tenzig towards the staircase. They made their way up winding flights of stairs and across landings floored in wood that creaked loudly beneath narrow slots in the ceiling. Tenzig marvelled at how vulnerable the tower was. Presently, they arrived in a surprisingly small room, and the gatekeeper took his leave. In all this time, Tenzig had seen not one other person, but now the door slid open, and Brother Abbot himself entered the room. "Tenzig," the abbot said, his voice grave and totally assured, "the master of the secret arts has assured me that you aspire to membership of his branch of the Order, and all that entails. to membership, moreover, with mastery. You know that such rank can only be earned. I do, he replied, throat suddenly dry and tight. The room seemed to be closing in, constricting his chest so that the beat of his heart pressed against the walls themselves. Then know this, said the abbot. If you succeed today, you will achieve just such mastery with glory. But if you fail, far more than this order will revile you. The world will curse your name. Legions unborn will suffer your failure. He looked away, a half-amused expression on his face. I have confidence in you, Tenzing. Your master says that it is justified. Will you accept this burden at the risk of your life? Tenzing paused. The room seemed to focus in on him with a thunderous silence. I will, he heard someone say in the near distance, realizing that it was himself. The abbot smiled grimly. Good. Then this is how we will deal with the dragon. The scribe read from a text that flopped across his lectern like an expired snake, limp, but still fanged and deadly. The planet is in a state of intermediate civilization, supported only by the presence of records left over from an STC source. Only one continent supports a human population, and there are no nations as such, but a number of warring factions and duchies. A broadly feudal system pertains outside of the religious orders, with homage paid to a ceremonial king by the warlords who compete for temporal leadership. The tech records are maintained by a monastery, the Order of the Heavenly Virtues. The scribe paused, frowning as if the taste of the words which were to follow were bitter in his mouth. The cult of the Emperor is extinct on this world, if indeed it ever existed here. Two religions coexist. One is a superstitious animism based on the sky and the forces of nature, while the other is a broadly philosophical cult which maintains the monasteries. Our scouts, to their credit, were unable to understand the basic tenets of the heresy. The cults are both widely respected, and the monastic orders in particular are large and almost as powerful as the warlords, perhaps because they control the supply of advanced goods on this world. He glanced up from his scroll. It would be a mistake to assume that because the predominant level of civilization is primitive, that these people have no subtlety or machinery. The complexity of their life may hide many details, and I would advise extreme caution when dealing with other than from the position of unassailable power. He looked down, presentation at an end, and began to roll up his scroll. Judith glanced round at the rest of the audience. Inquisitor Rathman, charged with the responsibility of returning the worlds of this cluster to Imperial rule, looked abstracted. Gloved fingers twisted his signet ring from side to side as he waited for the scribe to finish. "A question," he said, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair. "The STC source. How much do we know about that?" The scribe shook his head. "Very little, I'm afraid. The natives refuse to talk about it to our agents. But this is a primitive world, by and large. All of the libraries of tech information that we know of were destroyed during the Age of Strife. The odds say that these monks work from the records of parchment, but they could contain details of devices long forgotten, bizarre arcana, beyond the ken of any, save the Emperor himself," he added, piously. Joachim, present as the head of the detachment of Adeptes Arbites aboard the fleet, shook his head angrily. "This whole world is like a can of worms," he said. "Little warlord wrigglers waiting on the hook one by one. Unless there's a faster way to bag 'em, we could be here forever." The Inquisitor shook his head. "That's not acceptable, Joachim. Not at all. We must establish control over this backwater, and swiftly. We need a weak point." "There is anarchy down there," said the clerk. "The scouts could find no hierarchy. Kill one warlord, and another will rise to take its place." Judith stared into space. "An opening," she mused. "Yes, I need an opening. Secret knowledge. The STC library, if there really was one, would be ideal." Such computerized libraries, relics of the dark age of technology, contained incalculable wisdom vital to the works of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but all the known ones were damaged in some way, and there were so few of them left. If she could find one. "Our assassin appears to be lost in a pleasant dream," Joachim said dryly. "Perhaps our esteemed colleague would be prepared to give us the benefit of her insight." Judith turned her eyes on him. For the entire voyage he had been sniping, little abusive derogations, nasty gibs and gibes at the expense of the Assassin's Guild. Relations between the monolithic Adeptus Arbites and their secretive independent rivals, the Imperial Assassins, were far from friendly. She stared at him, pupils narrowing to the semblance of gun sights until he looked away. "There is a weakness," she said determinedly, "and the one which is wide open to action by my team. My team, you understand." She looked at the Inquisitor, who watched her with interest. "I can deliver this world to you on a platter," she said, "along with the library, which won't be of any use to anyone if we wind up bombing it from your orbit." She glanced at Joachim. "It should be obvious that we have a perfect lever to bring them into line, of their own accord. Of course, it'll take a while, but I believe as few as 2 kills might be sufficient." "I hope you can deliver on that promise," Joachim said with a smirk. "If not—" He left it unsaid, but she knew what he was thinking. There were those among the Abites who would love to adopt the functions of the assassins in addition to their own, and augment the considerable power of the judges within the priesthood. And Joachim clearly felt the assassins were not entirely to be trusted. A secular arm they were, a sharp but treacherous blade that might twist in a wielder's hand. Judith had not failed to notice that while she was aboard the flagship, Joachim wore his black carapace armor everywhere. Inquisitor Rathman nodded at the scribe, who activated a recorder. "Let it be entered," he intoned, "that on this day, assassin Judith Benastidor did avow by action under her leadership she could bring the administration of the planet into line with Imperial governance." He looked at Judith knowingly, a lethal twinkle in his eyes, and she suddenly felt a shaft of coldness run through his stomach. Yes, the Inquisitor knew how to play the bureaucracy off against itself. "Let it be further entered that with the power invested in us," he added, "that we hold her to a promise, and instruct her to work in conjunction with Joachim Harriman of the Adeptus Arbites, to ensure that the rule of this planet passes into our hands within 30 standard days. In the name of the Emperor, let it be so." When Tenzig returned to his cell after his meeting with the abbot, he spent an unquiet night worrying about the task which he had been set. Brother Abbot had been firm. Word of the proceedings of the meeting must not travel any further. Secrecy was essential. As a junior member of the Order present, execution of the task must devolve on him. It was an awesome responsibility. He lay staring at the ceiling, remembering the abbot's words. As master of the Order of the Heavenly Virtues, the abbot was wise in the ways of the world, just as the master of the secret arts was educated in the dark sciences of death. "They come from far away, but we must not assume that they are naive about sources of power. They will seek us out and try to manipulate the Order, to use us as a tool in which to control the warriors. They will try to make it look attractive to us. They know of our library, do they not? How could they not know?" Tenzig had thought. The Order's cunning artifacts were everywhere, beyond hiding, in the possession of selfish nobles. "So, something will be done. They must be led to believe what they want to, that we will do as they wish. They will not believe that if they understand our strength as well as they understand our weakness. And so," he smiled wolfishly, "we must conceal our strength. It falls to one of us to stem their representatives' investigations at the source, one of us adept in the secret arts. Tenzig, you will meet with the Imperials. You will be presented to them as the most august personage of the Abbey, as myself. The master of the secret arts will be with you. His day of liberation from pain draws near, and it is better that he should die proudly than by wasting. And then you will do what you have been trained to do." Lying sleeplessly on his cot, Tenzing seemed to sense his entire life at his fingertips. It was a painful feeling, coming to terms with the embarrassments and a grief of a life which had been, if not harsh, at least full of unasked-for surprises. From the farm of his father to the monastery by the way of bloody turmoil during the War of the 7 Marches, only to find that this time of peace there was no call for those who wished to rise. Long life and prosperity meant that there were no vacancies for the rank of master, a rank to which he had aspired, for it would put his ambition to rest. But this was not the holy mission for which he had purified his soul, he reminded himself. This was apocalypse. The future status of the world may well rest on his shoulders. Too strong a resistance would bring the wrath of the Imperium down on the shoulders of the people, whilst too easy an acquiescence would invite tyranny. Responsibility for the secrets of his order was a grey curse, weighing down heavily on his soul until he felt as if the very foundations of his mind were creaking with protest. Eventually, he drifted off into a troubled sleep, from which he was awakened by the thunder of the morning drums. He opened the shutters of his window to the same pearlescent glow they had closed on the night before, for it was never truly dark on Nicol, cloud-shrouded from a million suns. And then he offered prayers for guidance. It was going to be a long day. The shuttle circled the walls of the monastery before it landed, by arrangement, in the valley. Judith watched impassively as Jochen brought in smoothly, almost contemptuously. The savages, as he insisted on calling them, showed no sign of running in terror. Evidently they had been warned at the very least. The least, Judith told him. Grunting, he powered down the drive unit and released the loading bay door. Unthinkably high above the clouds, the fleet was waiting, but down here there was no sign of it. The isolation was complete. Followed by the judge, she made her way down to the bay. The crawler was already powered up. She climbed into the driver's compartment, followed by Jochen, and the doors latched behind them. "You told Sanjit what to do?" she asked, barely expecting confirmation as the engines of the vehicle roared their power behind her. "I did," Jochen said. "She agreed. 2 of us should be enough." "And for your part?" She paused, delicately. Jochen snorted. "For my part, I won't sneer at them into their faces, or curse them. So this abbot person." "Yes, the abbot," she said with marked self-restraint. "The abbot is possibly the most powerful person on the planet. You'll know what is within our power to offer him. Imperial justice is only called for if he defies us." Jochen's hands, sheathed in slick, black skin, flexed as if at her throat. "Good," she thought, "just as long as your prejudices continue to blind you. Just as long as you don't ask any more questions about the ignorant natives." "So, are we agreed? Don't want to kill him. We merely wish to instill appropriate attitude among the natives." Jochen laughed coarsely. "You should have been a diplomat," he said. "The famous Black Widow." "And you," she thought feminously, as she steered the crawler towards the tall walls of the monastery, "will make a beautiful corpse." The gate captain stared down from the walls of the monastery at the vehicle that was approaching. His eyes narrowed as if he was arranging it. His smile was not a pleasant one. People who came to the order flaunting their power usually left it in small pieces. The holiest shrine of the most powerful sect on the planet was not to be treated lightly. Below him, the vast gates slid open on their runners, teams of sweating slaves pushing them out of the path of the crawler. It rolled forward smoothly, drifting to a halt within the outer wall. Similar meetings were taking place at 4 other cities around the continent to conceal the singularity of this particular one. The gate captain stared down at the metal carapace. Rushing to avoid the lash, the slaves began to slide the door shut again. "The walls," Judith murmured, "are quite thick, not just ceremonial. Suppose people hereabouts have a different attitude to priesthood." Joachim snorted. "From what? Priests are priests. Commoners don't mess with them. Whatever. If anything I've ever learned, that's it. Why mess around?" Judith bit back her reply and glanced at him slyly. "Yes, but those priests are not servants of the Emperor. They have knowledge that is priceless by the standards of their word. So why are they left alone?" If Joachim couldn't figure it out, she wasn't going to help him. She set the crawler brakes and left the power on standby. Not that they'd have much chance of making a quick getaway. She'd seen the power bows on the walls and the automatic rifles. Symptoms of a tech incursion. Joachim cracked the hatch and lowered the ramp, and out they stepped, onto alien soil. A party of black-robed men was approaching them, their faces almost chalky white beneath the cowls. Junior clerics. Swinging censers preceded them, aromatic smoke falling gently in the still air. It was humid but cool, as if they stood on clouds. Judith waited just ahead of Joachim to greet them, keeping her hands concealed in her cloak. She bit the inside of her cheek, feeling the familiar excitement, the rush of action, every nerve on fire as her sin-skin sensed her mood and responded to it, interfacing with her nervous system and feeding her amplified senses with data. The monk stopped just before they reached the crawler and stood there, expectantly. "Greetings," Judith said in the native tongue, surprised at the ease with which the words came. Earlier she had donned a hypnocask in order to learn the local language. "I am the Imperial representative. I have come to speak to your abbot, as agreed with our earlier contact." The monks seemed slightly confused by the presence of a female. Presently one of them spoke. "Where is the one who came to us before?" he said in a high, clear voice. "He was a messenger of low importance," said Judith. "I am an Imperial diplomat, and it is now my honor to talk to your leaders." The monk nodded. "We are in turn honored by your estimable presence," he said mischievously. "If you would be pleased to come this way." Judith moved in the direction indicated. The judge followed her, his eyes roving contemptuously over the natives. None of the monks were armed, but that meant nothing. She felt her hair twitching at the thought of it. Monks with guns could only mean trouble. Monks without guns could mean anything. The inner wall, unlike a Yauta, had no large doors. Instead, a third of the way around the walls from where the crawler had entered, the monks led her to a small portal. As she passed within, she noted that it was of hardwood bound in iron, and it was thick, nothing like as thick as the walls. She glanced up, and her boosted vision noted the arrow slits. Monastery. Hell, she thought, this is a fortress. Joachim was becoming increasingly twitchy. This was the first mission he had gone along on without massive fire support. Good, she thought. Maybe for once you'll see what it's like to do an honest day of work. It gave her a warm glow of triumph to see him discomfited. They passed out of the inner wall of the monastery and came into a vast open space in the shape of a pentagonal figure. At each corner, tall towers reared high into the sky, yet there was a squat solidity to them that screamed fortification. In the distance, Judith could see monks going around their daily business. The party she was in the midst of seemed to attract no particular attention. "How much further have we got to go?" she asked. The monk with a high-pitched voice looked at her curiously, but censored his reply. "Not far," he said. "The abbot will receive you in White Tower yonder." He pointed out to the tallest, most massive tower in the complex. It tapered to a needle-like spire, yet it possessed no windows less than 10 meters from the ground. They proceeded in silence to the foot of the tower. At this point, the censer-bearers stopped and turned as one to face the east, raised their voices in a strange chant. Joachim reached out and gripped Judith's arm. "What's that?" he whispered. "I don't know." She shook off his hand in irritation. "Some ritual. The star rises in that direction on this world, doesn't it? Even if we never see it." Joachim nodded and stood listening while Judith's mind ran in overdrive. Presently the door at the foot of the tower swung open on a hallway lit by torchlight. "You may enter now," said the monk. "We are forbidden from the tower." Judith looked at him, but no further guidance was coming. His face was a shut book. She stepped forward and entered the belly of the beast. Within the tower, the evidence of siege readiness was, if anything, greater than without. Even Joachim must be noticing this, she realized. The man who had thought the ideal defense was a strike force of Imperial Marines and a sterilized planet at the other end, no matter how delicate the prize was to be won. Paper and bombs. Which of these narrow steps were mounted on concealed pivots? What of the polished, creaking floor? She felt a creeping admiration for whoever had designed this tower. You could lose an army in the frontal assault on this heap, unless you stood back and bombed it out. The opener of the door beckoned to them silently, and led them up the treacherous steps in perfect safety. At the landing at the top of the second flight of stairs, the monk paused and rapped twice on a sliding door. It slid open with a hiss of well-greased runners, and he bowed deeply before turning to descend the stairs. "You may enter." "You may enter," said a voice from within. Joachim caught Judith's eye and nodded. All right. He knows what to do." Contented and ready, she stepped across the threshold. Tenzig looked up, breathing in shallow, controlled sips to calm his racing heart. He straightened in his chair. "You may enter," he called. Standing by his side, the Master of Secret Arts nodded approvingly, then froze into stillness. Tenzig sweated in the heavy embroidered robes that had been prepared to impress the ambassadors, trying to look dignified. There were 2 of them, the minimum number for the display, should it be necessary. And here they came. The diplomats entered. With a nervous flop of his heart, Tenzig thought, "Why, one of them is a woman." This was not something to which he was accustomed, not something he had worried about in Julie, celibacy being no part of a Hetonian monk's vows. They were both dressed from head to foot in tight form-fitting black garment that glistened like oil on water, and above that a cloak and boots and other accoutrements of an exotic nature. She, the leader, was nondescript, short-haired, and instantly forgettable, unlike her companion, who affected a bush of flaming red hair and a face of brutal demeanour. That one is meant to look like the warrior, Tenzig thought, instantly deciding to concentrate on the woman. The master opened his lips. "The brother abbot will receive you now, should you speak your rank," he said stiffly. Tenzig sat attentively, fingers clenched within his long, deep sleeves. The woman spoke lightly and intelligibly. "I am Judith Bidasar, diplomat of the Etertus Terra and aide to Inquisitor Rathman, head of the Imperial expedition to this cluster. This is Joachim Ariman, an Imperial judge. I bring you greetings in the name of the Imperium, and in the name of Inquisitor Rathman, who wishes me to express his sincerest wishes for peace and understanding between us." Tenzig kept a straight face. Stripped of the diplomatic argot, the meaning was as cold and simple as a naked blade. Imperial expedition, peace and understanding. There was understanding, all right. "Thank you kindly for your greetings. May I too express my sincere desire for peace and understanding between the Order of the Heavenly Virtues and your Imperium. However, the order being of a purely religious nature, I am filled with some curiosity why you might bring such greetings from a secular institution to a humble monk as myself. And now the confirmation." The fingers of his left hand fiddled inconspicuously with his sleeve, and he felt the presence of the master beside him, as tense as a coiled spring. Waiting to unwind in his one eternal moment of enlightenment, the female diplomat smiled, without showing her teeth. "There is no need for confusion, I assure you," she said. "Shall we dispense with the formalities?" Very abrupt, Tenzig thought disapprovingly. Is that what we must look forward to in the future? No matter. "Certainly," he said easily. "By all means, let us be brief. I ask again, why have you come here to trouble us for our attention?" "You possess a library," she said flatly. "We know this. We wish to examine it. Such libraries give the owners great power. You control the supply of certain artifacts to the warlords of this world. You, not they, are important. The Imperium needs such libraries. It will not be desecrated or destroyed, but it will be necessary for Imperial scribes to enter and copy all your records for the archives of Terra." Her eyes were calculating, quizzical. "Yes, if that's the worst she has in store for us," Tenzig thought, "may whatever gods there are save us." "Ah," he said hastily, "you ask for much. I must warn you. What can we expect of your Imperium in return?" The Imperial judge stared at him condescendingly. "Ask not what the Imperium does for you," he said, "but what you can do for the Imperium. Do you not know that your very souls depend on it? That, without the Divine Emperor, the hordes of warp space would be upon you in an instant, bringing savagery and insanity in their wake?" The master focused on the judge like a living gun. It will be him, thought Tenzig, the hard man, here to play against her diplomacy. Expendable, but I wonder if he's aware of it. The woman spoke up hastily, covering for her companion's outburst. Your Holiness, we prefer not to take, but to have given voluntarily. I stand before you unarmed. And at this, the master stiffened even more, if that was possible, but bearing a warning. We are prepared to be merciful. In return for your cooperation, you will be made lords of all your survey. This expedition has more planets to attend to, and Inquisitor Rathman would be more than gratified to leave the maintenance of this world in your caring hands. In your caring hands. I beg you, while you have the opportunity, cooperate. We have the power to destroy you in an instant. The judge snorted, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the master, searching for some hidden threat. Tenzing breathed, deeply, carefully. That is the dangerous one, he realized. The woman will negotiate, but that one is a fanatic. Is that your final word? He asked, wondering when the master would act. Because if so, I must. It seemed to happen in slow motion. As Judith opened her mouth, the master was already moving with the grace of a striking cobra. The disk of shining steel flickered as it left his fingertips, and it was still spinning as he lunged forward, the rod in his hands a dark promise of pain and death. The shuriken caught Yokrim full in the neck. He spasmed, the small pistol dropping from his fingers, even as the master altered course towards Judith. That was a mistake. Her expression never changed as she raised her left index finger, but a pulse of blue light flashed from her ring, and she had to merely step aside from the corpse as it crashed to her feet. The digital pistol was pointed squarely at Tenzing's abdomen. He stared at it. It would be very foolish of you to use that, he said mildly. The master lay on the floor, a dark stain already edging out from beneath Yokrim's corpse. I know, said the woman. What guarantee of safe conduct can you give me? Tenzing felt release at the knowledge that he was not yet destined to die. You're no diplomat, he accused. And you, she smiled, are no monk. Oh yes, I am. I am a monk, but perhaps they do things differently in the Imperium. They locked eyes squarely. Her gaze was like looking into a mirror. Death in the morning. You must have wanted that one dead quite badly, he thought. You could have saved him. An assassin is a kind of diplomat, Judith said dryly. So was a judge. It was up to you to decide which of us you would negotiate with, but I would like to know what kind of monks you are before I commit myself to anything. Tenzing folded his hands in his lap, very slowly. Once upon a time, he said, there was a very peaceful colony, founded by a breakaway sect from Old Terra. It existed in stasis for millennia, a duplicate of a long-dead civilization. The tech wisdom was given to the hands of the monks for safekeeping, and then came the wars, the disappearance of the stars, the coming of madness. Judith nodded slowly. The STC source was valuable. You had to learn to defend it. You had to fight, use influence, kill the nobles who... What's an STC source? Tenzing asked, feigning puzzlement. Judith chewed her lower lip, watching him intently. After a long time she said, Never mind. Your archives are valuable, no? That is correct. Our historical archives are incomplete. No one else on this world can equal them. There was a sect of Old Terra millennia before our ancestors boarded the starships that brought them here. The words tripped off his tongue, with barely a hint of deception. And their descendants, the followers of the heavenly virtues, and of the secret way. And what we know, we inherited from them, not just tech, but our ways. And so, he spread his arms. Judith nodded again. Very good. If we can verify that nothing evil exists in your archives, we may leave you to your works. But first, she paused. Yes? There is the matter of planetary governance, she added. I was not exceeding my ambit when I offered you the rule of this world, whatever he may have thought you fit for. She nudged the corpse by her side with a black shod toe. Your order appeals to enforce its desires. For a long instant, the world seemed to stand still in reverence. Tenzing heard the hammering of his heart loud in his ears, a haunting from beyond the past, an offer of supreme power, security for the order, by which serving the Imperium might be ignored by it. He looked at the slightly built woman, seemed to see her through to a time when things had been different, an age where absolutes were not an offer, an age more in keeping with the philosophy of the order, a holy prophet who had stayed among men and preached of fate and the eternal cycle of being, who had achieved enlightenment. Finally he nodded. On behalf of my order, I am constrained to accept this offer. If you carry the necessary documents, you are free to leave alive. I regret," his eyes swept the floor, "the necessity of this show of force." "Don't worry," Judy grinned. "It was a necessary formality. We cannot afford to leave planets in the hands of weaklings." "Yes, I understand," Tenzing thought. "You wish to see the library, then?" She nodded. "That is what I came here for," she said. "To see it intact. Bombardment can make rather a mess of a planet. Take me there." "This way, then." Tenzing stood stiffly and ushered her to the door. Together they descended the stairs, all the way to the basement. "Here lie records saved in ages past," said Tenzing, pausing at the great wooden doors. Producing a key, he put it in the lock and pulled, heart thundering behind his ribs. "Lights," said Judith tersely. "Here." Tenzing touched a switch, rubbed at the dimple of the plastic that was worn smooth by ages of fingers. A warm glow flooded the corridor, and stacks of lovingly catalogued scrolls had covered the walls. He stepped inside. "Do you see?" he said questioningly. "Do you see the source of our power?" Judith nodded. "Indeed," she said. For here was a wealth indeed, and power beyond the dreams of a barbarian warlord. "You'll have to arrange scribes to visit you," she added, "but this certainly confirms my offer to you." "So this is why you came and negotiated, instead of dictating from us above," he realized. A strange form of taxation indeed. She watched as she brought out the creamy parchment of the draft treaty, embossed with the Imperial seal, and held it before him so he might see. "And let us hope this is the start of a great era in the history of your world." Later, after the assassin had returned to her ship in the sky. "And the Master," the abbot said thoughtfully. "Do you believe he misinterpreted their response?" Tenzing, now Master Tenzing, shook his head. "Not exactly," he said. "More accurately, he understood it far too well. They are a hard people. Some display of force was inevitable, really. A balanced response." "Yes," said the abbot presently. "Then the Reverend Master fulfilled his duty, and you, Tenzing, have done your part." Tenzing bowed his head. "They will return, and next time it might be my calling to defend the order with my life." "Perhaps," the abbot said. Then he smiled. "But their ignorance of us has been increased to a safer level. You left them believing that the paper archives were our only source of wisdom." The abbot's words seemed to hang in the air, even after he had pressed the button in his pocket to trigger the teleport link to the chamber beneath the scriptorium, where the ancient, unimaginably sophisticated machines of the STC library waited patiently.